and welcome to the Leadership Room. Today, my guest is Derek Arden. Now, I first saw Derek giving a talk, I think last year. That's right, isn't it, Derek?
And so, Richard, yeah.
It was fantastic insofar as it gave you so many useful tips in terms of negotiation. He was also very gracious and kind to give me his book, which is Win-Win: How to Get a Winning Result from Persuasive Negotiation. You can also see it behind him. I love the book in that it gives you the ability to audit your own negotiating skills and then practical tips for improving them. It's been really useful. I've used it, multiple occasions. Derek is an expert in negotiation. He is an international keynote speaker and a business coach. He's worked in over 27 countries, collaborated with 5 major business schools, and he's spent 12 years as a visiting lecturer at Henley Management College. And I think this podcast is for people that perhaps struggle with negotiating. They struggle with negotiating with a boss, perhaps their clients, if they're running a business, maybe their colleagues, their family. And if you'd like to get negotiations advice, directly to your inbox every single Monday, you can subscribe to Derek's newsletter. Derek, what's it called?
It's called the Monday Morning Briefing. And send me an email, or these days, Richard, actually connect with me on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn doesn't get spammed out. Emails get spammed out all the time these days, as we discussed earlier.
Yeah, I try and read it every Monday. I don't always get around to it, but it's always full of useful tips. Okay, so with that said, welcome to the podcast, Derek. In your book, you talk about the cost of not negotiating. Can you kind of define what that is? What is the cost of not negotiating in everyday life?
Well, first of all, Richard, thanks for inviting me, and thank you for your very kind introduction. That's great, and it's a pleasure to be on the Leadership Room. So, the cost of negotiation is phenomenal. That's the real issue. And people don't negotiate because I think they're scared. They don't like conflict. They don't like to ask. There are so many reasons. But frankly, when you're buying something or buying something reasonably expensive, you can always get a deal. And if you don't ask, you don't get one of the golden rules. Or if you don't ask, you don't give the other person the opportunity to say yes to you. So what's the cost? Well, in my book, I talked about maybe if you buy a car, if you buy some white goods and things, and you don't shop around, and I mean, negotiating could be just going on the internet and having a look at the options, because that might be the cheapest option. But if you don't, then maybe if you were earning, I don't know, £50,000 a year, that may be a cost of about 5%, £2,500, let's say. And £2,500 is tax-free. This is the best tax-free benefit you can get. You don't have to pay tax on the savings. So if you rounded that up, and at 50,000, you'd almost be a 40% taxpayer in today's environment. So that's worth £3,800, bottom line. But if you're in business, if you're an SME running your own business, then and you had a turnover of, let's say, 100,000. And you could save 5 or 10%, or you could coach your people in it, and you could increase your prices by 5 or 10%. Then we're into £15,000-20,000 a year. And of course, if you've got a much larger turnover, as some of the companies that I work with have, then the savings are exponential.
And do you think there's an opportunity to negotiate with virtually everything, Derek? Do you think are there any limits where you perhaps wouldn't negotiate?
Oh, Richard, my philosophy is everything is negotiable. And in fact, that was the first book I ever read on it, by a guy called Kevin Kennedy. He was the only Brit that had ever written a book on negotiating at that stage. In fact, he was a Scotsman. And I met him, I sought him out, and I met him, and never thought 20 years later I'd be writing a book and having a bestseller and translated into Chinese. Yeah, I call myself a serial negotiator. Sometimes I apologize for negotiating when the other person gets embarrassed. I just say, I'm really sorry, but I just can't help myself. I just have to get a discount or ask or whatever, which creates a bit of fun. And one of the rules is, humor works, smiling works, being aggressive and asking for discounts or savings doesn't work. And very often the person can give you one, and you don't know that until you ask. And if they can, and if they like you, and you made them smile, and you've mirrored and matched their body language, then guess what? Savings are on, game on. And if you don't get a discount, so what? Get over it and move on.
And going back to that fun point, I was reading your book last night on a plane back from Glasgow, and I think you talked about being in an interview with a news on BBC Radio or something, and that the interviewer saying, "Oh, you don't seem aggressive enough. You don't seem kind of vicious enough."
No.
Am I right in saying that? And
Well,
you responded, you don't need to be. It can be kind of enjoyable and fun.
I think it was on BBC Radio London, and I was being interviewed. I was in the studio, actually. It was live. You wouldn't have to be live these days. But he said, "Well, you seem a nice guy, really." You know, I thought all negotiators were sort of hardball, let's say President Trump's style of negotiation. I used to call it John Wayne style, but I guess it's President Trump style now. And I said, no, you don't have to be. You want to get on with people. You want a win-win situation, which is why Pearson called my book Win-Win, How to Get a Winning Result from Persuasive Negotiations. Yeah, you can be the nice guy. You can still be tough. Oh, Richard, that's a bit more than I was expecting to pay. What can you do to help me? And you say, well, I'll give you 10%. Derek said, well, that's not really enough, Richard. You know, I was expecting a bit more from you. Notice the way I've dropped my voice. I've dropped my voice tone. You can do it softly. You don't have to be aggressive. In fact, Richard, as soon as someone's aggressive towards you, what do? We go sort of, oh, okay, not sure I like this person. So we go on the defensive and we start pushing back, which is the natural psychological human reaction to doing that. So yeah, you know, the nice guy, but everything's negotiable. Rule number one.
Okay, fantastic. So I wanted to talk a little bit about body language, because I think a lot of people see body language as like this hidden, secretive kind of like, almost, it's often associated with like Russian spies and that kind of thing. But how important is it? And should I be learning set techniques for body language, or should I be perhaps mirroring or matching my body language to the situation?
Well, I think it's probably three questions there, Richard. So let's take them. Let's take them one at a time. Body language is really important. It's 5 times more difficult to lie with body language than it is with the words. And as a presentation expert, you can see that I'm using my hands to make out the points on 5. Yeah, it's 5 times. So this is what the psychologists say, and you can argue with any of these statistics, but if it is 5 times or in that sort of arena, then when we ask a difficult question and the person says yes, but at the same time they move back, fold their arms and gently shake their head, that's pretty 100% that they're not in agreement. The yes is really a no. So that is important. And in sales, and let's be fair about it, Brits don't like the word sales, but we're all in sales. We've all got to influence people. If you say, well, you know, do you want to go ahead with this, Derek? And I go, yeah, I really like to go ahead with this. Move back, fold my arms. That's a no. People say, oh, this is obvious. Well, it's so obvious that most people don't notice it because it's common sense. The thing about common sense is not very common, as we know. And therefore, raising your awareness to body language is really important. Number 2, sensory acuity. Sensory acuity means we're sensory aware of what other people are doing with their body language, what they're saying with their words, how they're coming across, their voice tonality. I've already talked to you about reducing the volume of your voice when you're ask a difficult question. So a difficult question with anybody, whether it's an HR interview, a salary negotiation or whatever, just drop your voice. Is there anything else you can do to help me? Is there anything else you can do to help me? It's hardly going to work. But yeah, you're managing that body language at those points is really important. And then you raise the psychology of what they call ISO practice, mirror and matching other people's body language. People are influenced by people they like. On the basis they're influenced by people they like. And Robert Cialdini, the world's most famous business psychologist, talks about the 6 traits of influence. Number one, Richard, is does the person like you or not? Now, this is so obvious when I'm teaching or talking at a conference. I'm embarrassed to say rule number one is does the person like you or not? Because I thought that's obvious. But you know, people that we meet, you take an instant dislike to for some reason. What is it? They're grumpy. They keep you waiting. They're late. They give you a handshake, which is saying, I'm more important than you, a hand over the top. You know, why do we say his hands on top? Because that's his hands on top. And if they give you one of those handshakes rather than a straight up and down, I say he or she or whatever. Or you give you one of these handshakes where they shake hands with you like that, and then they decide we're in an arm wrestling contest and I'm going to turn your hand over. So if we go back to ISA practice, it means mirroring the body language gently, unobtrusively, mirroring the language they use, and mirroring the tone of voice, and mirroring the speed that they talk at. In other words, putting yourself in their world. As Dale Carnegie, who wrote the first psychological book on really influencing and persuasion, how to win friends and influence, how to win friends and influence, he said, put yourself in the other person's shoes, which is what most people don't do. They got such a big ego, and this is their problem with the negotiation. They got such a big ego that I'm more important than the other person, so I won't stop. Listen. And when you meet really clever people, really high achievers, they make you feel great. They make you feel great. I met Richard Branson walking down the aisle at Singapore airport. I couldn't resist going up and talking to him, and I asked him the most daft question I've asked anybody in my life, because I was a bit intimidated by Richard Branson. And I said, I suppose you've got a lot of deals on. What a daft question. And he said yes, and it went silent. But because he was such a nice man, he turned the conversation around, made me feel good, and said, what are you doing in Singapore? And I'd done it quietly in a small tone of voice, so no one else heard it. I didn't embarrass Richard Branson, and he was charming. Trouble was, he got whisked away then by the security people to this platinum lounge that no one knows exists in theory, where the David Beckham's of this world. And I missed the opportunity of saying, would you give me a reference for my book or something like that? So yeah, your question about body language, I think it's really, really important. And basically, you can read what people are thinking about, not what they're saying, from their body language.
Okay, fantastic. So I wanted to go a little bit into mindset going into a negotiation. So how important is mindset? And should I say I'm in a bad mood, I've woken up on the wrong side of the bed, whatever, should I put off a negotiation to the next day if, perhaps I think my mindset might affect the outcome?
Well, first of all, Richard, you don't look the sort of guy that wakes up in a bad mood. You look like, we have, first of all, us high achievers, leaderships, can't afford to wake up in a bad mood. So maybe you have to stop drinking that extra pint at night. I don't know. As one of my famous gurus says, it's a choice whether you wake up in the morning and say, it's fantastic to be alive. Let's take a lovely gulp of fresh air and look forward to the day. Or you can wake up and say, oh, another day, it's January, February, it's dark and it's raining. That's your choice. That's a choice. And from psychology, we talk about putting yourself in the right state. Some people say, are you in the right state, or are you in a right state? So that's a choice. And when we prepare a positive mindset, then we have to sort ourselves out. And of course, that means maybe being a bit more careful what we do the night before if you've got an important meeting, important negotiation. But most high achievers get up early in the morning, prepare themselves, and then go for it. No, you shouldn't put it off. You should sort yourself out. And you can sort yourself out really, really quickly. And there's a few tricks and techniques I talk about in my newsletters and on my blogs and on my YouTube channel. So, but one of them is, okay, Derek, let's go for it. Right, we've got difficult negotiation. Be early for whatever it is, whether it's a Zoom call, whether it's a meeting. If you're going to London, there's no good saying, the trains were up the chute. Go 2 hours early, go in a coffee shop, You can get your work done next to the office where you're going. Get there 10, 15 minutes early. Have a look around, suss things out if you can. Be in a prepared state, and never sit down in a reception if they ask you to. Why is that? Because you sit down, you hunch your body over, you put yourself in the wrong mood, in the wrong state. Stand upright, walking around ready, so when the person comes out to meet you, greet you, shake hands, nice to meet you, I'm Derek Arden, pleased to meet you, etc. So you're kind of in control. So many people checking their phones, doing all this over their phones, hunched up, in the wrong state, in the wrong mood. Remember what my mum used to say to me, and I never took any notice of her at the time, hold your head up. Hi, Derek, stand up straight. All those little tips have been passed down from millions of generations to stay good, because your question was, if I'm in a bad mood. If you're in a bad mood, you can almost sort it out straight away by changing your physical posture from this to this, almost instantly. And one of the books I've got on my shelf, which is a fantastic book from 1973, Dr. David Schwartz. David Schwartz, The Magic of Thinking Big, said a couple of tips, and they were so basic, I thought, and I tried them. Walk 25% quicker. Yeah, okay. Stand up straight, look up, and dress for success. Do you know what he said in his book in 1972? He said that students went into an exam dressed smartly, got better results than one went in jeans and t-shirts like all their mates did. I thought, wow, yeah, you're right. You're right. When I go to London now, still wear a suit, white shirt and a tie. Probably take the tie off now because they're not very well, makes me look a bit old, doesn't it? I don't want to be thought as old. I'd much rather have a Steve Jobs t-shirt on like you've got on there, Richard, but which looks pretty cool. But it depends where you're going, doesn't it? The business you're in, you look really smart. If I'm going to financial services firm in Canary Wharf, I'm trying to sell them and I'm pitching at a high price, which we always should do when we're negotiating, because you can always come down, but you can't go back up. Then I want to look expensive, however you do it. Hence, I have to buy these Ghent jumpers for £90 instead of Marks and Spencer's ones, which are 25, but that's part of the game.
Okay, fantastic. So we're going to take a break and we'll do the next episode next week. But before we do, can I ask you, in your book, you mentioned you wear a red tie for business.
Yeah.
So before we go, we'll reconvene next week. We're going to cover a load more interesting things, including 5 mistakes that people make when they're actually negotiating. But before we go, why the red tie?
Oh, that's very interesting, isn't it? That is very interesting. So, okay. So number one, red is a energy color. So red is an energy color. So it fires me up and I want to be energized. It links back to your question 5 minutes ago about putting yourself in the right state, in the right mood. So red's an energy color. It's also a little bit aggressive. Look at Donald Trump, always wears a red tie. I didn't know he sold those ties through his shops as well. You can't make it up, can you? So, it's sort of saying, I mean business to the other side, and it's energy. I'll tell you a funny story, actually. I'm quite big in Bulgaria, actually. I don't know anyone else that's big in Bulgaria, Richard, but I'm quite big in Bulgaria. I get picked up at the airport and I get on Bulgarian live TV on in the morning, and it's great. I get paid next to nothing, because those of you who've been to Bulgaria know it's a lev and there's no levs to the pound. But the guy out there is great, and he's like you. He's fun, and I get treated. So I went and bought 15 red ties in Marks and Spencer's for something like £10-15 each. And I went out there and I said, this is the official negotiator's tie. When you got this tie on, your negotiating is going to be fantastic. Now, I made that up. It was a bit of fun, but they were gagging for these ties, which I was giving away. Yeah, I just gave them away. Oh, wow. But you see, the point there is it's a bit of fun, but they were believing what I was saying, which was fine. And therefore, they would have gone in probably with a tie on. I don't know, this was 10 years ago, probably gone in with a tie on, feeling, oh, really the business here. And to do that, they probably prepared, they probably done the research, all the things that average negotiators don't do. Roughly, very roughly, you should spend 10 to 20 times preparing for an important negotiation, compared with what normally people do, which is sort of 10 minutes maybe in the car on the way or on the train, and then they wonder why they don't get a very good deal. Richard, thanks for inviting me, and I look forward to part 2.
Thanks very much, Derek. I'll see you in part 2.